many are looking for resources and those opportunities which will advance their soul, will advance their life stream in a manner that will allow them to progress in the best way moving forward. And many others do not know as they postulate and consider what might be. For all they see is the black and white of the occurrences today from certain perspectives, for they know not any other. And so we would say that at this point in time, all that you seek to elicit and enlist in the sharing to another is most opportune. For there is always the wanting, and it is the connection to find those who are in that space of wanting more. It is these that you seek, and that is the posture from which we move as well. For when someone is open to enlisting more within their life, then they are open to new pathways of purpose. But if they believe that they are in the mode of all that is, that all is already known and all is pure physicality with a minimal spiritual influence interjected, then there is not the full potentiality to exist what might have otherwise occurred. And so know that from each perspective, there is a belief system that is not intended oftentimes to be exclusive of another, but it is the lack of understanding from within that perspective that others perhaps do not feel as this or that one may. And so there is a questioning among many who do not have an intention of being anything other than who they are from a loving posture. And it is a quizzical undertaking for those who do not understand that in their perspective, there is a perceived alternate perspective of less than or uninclusiveness. In other words, of not being inclusive of their preference, of their life stream. And so it is a push-pull to some extent. And you see, if there were not an intention for a greater understanding to be delved into, then the push-pull would never have been incorporated, and all would be of the same nationality and mix. But there was the wanting and desiring to know and to understand more. And so the diversity aspect of being different was developed in time, because if everyone looked exactly as the other, there would be no distinction and no choice made from a mental posture. And of course, it is the moving away from the mental posture that is sought, for it is the alignment with the consciousness of the soul essence and that greater expanse that was sought within the physical form. And so all these other intricacies were developed so that there was a clear pathway of distinction, and also the opportunity to understand from one posture or another what this or that felt like. And it is the looking for that when there is a belief system in play and in place. It is looking for that confirmation that what one believes is actually so. And so oftentimes there is a drawing in of a belief that is not actually so at all, but it is sought as a reinforcement from the posture of the belief that is elicited from the one who does hold that perspective. And we might say that that often occurs as opposed to it being so. For if the person who postured that there was a different enactment of the way that they are treated from one to the other, if they actually stopped and asked if that was the intention of the one who did formulate a response in a method that was felt to be exclusionary, then they might find that that was not the intention at all, but rather a reinforcement of what the belief system did look to adopt and align with, so that the belief could be further validated. Do you see? Might we say that there is, at this juncture, and there was, the expression of the one who typically may not have shared perspective that was held within the conversation within her mind. But because there was the deep wanting of the group as a whole, she then did share a perspective that was held innermost that typical in conversation would not have been divulged. And so you were privy then to understand her perspective. And then you were able to share a perspective of enlightenment from your posture. But do you see that often in communications, there is not the belief that someone perhaps took away or held something other than what was communicated? In other words, it was not your belief system to impart it in the way it was taken up. And so we would say that it is when there is this conjecturing within the mind and ego from the posture of almost formulating an adversarial interjection where there is none within the mind posture that does diminish and then almost take away the focus from what one is actually imparting. And the mind then engages in a drama of some sort that is not at all the intention, perhaps, of the one in the communication. And so there is a posturing and an illusionary premise that is then supposed and proposed within the dialogue. And what we would say is that often in this more mental banter, that there is not the inflection and the divulgence of what the one is posturing and thinking from what is being communicated. In other words, it is internalized. And it is internalized with a confirmation belief that this is that, and these are those, and this is the way it is. And then one goes out and has another communication, and there is again a posturing and a reinforcement. But do you see from your perspective that you held, that was not the intention at all?
Mm.
And so what we would say is that often there is a reinforcement of a belief that is not actually real. And we see it within many things of this day, where there is perhaps even a mirroring aspect that is interjected, where there might be a belief of something and it is projected upon another. And that awareness is too difficult to see within oneself. And so it is projected in some aspect because it isn't the energetic frequency that is within the mix that does elevate a circumstance. But it may not be the actual thing that was communicated or intended at all. And so it is in the discussion, in the wanting to get to the bottom of it, in the preference to truly share, which does not often happen in quick conversations, does not often happen in a dialogue, does not often happen because it does then get to the core of the one who has the belief. And it is very sensitive, and it is almost personal. And so it is stuffed down and layered upon with other beliefs similar to the one that may not have been at all as it was perceived. Do you see that the energies that were at play drew one to the other? In other words, there are energies held by one communicator and energies held by another communicator. And there may be different confluences and influences that are within the dynamic of the mix of the two. And each may have certain posturing and deeper beliefs, but we will say that it is the energy between the two that are in polarity with one to the other that are drawing these occurrences and the perceptions that are received and perceived to be so. But we will tell you that oftentimes what is communicated and what is held within the one communicating it is not to be and is not intended to be received in the manner in which it was. And so know that it is an energy draw, and the value of this is that when there is a dynamic created in a, let us say, adversarial, but not perhaps cognitively such, but an adversarial flow where it raises the awareness of each one within the dynamic, then that is when you look at the occurrence and you look at the energy held individually, not with the other, but with self. And this is where you become the detective or the sleuth in what energies are held at bay within, that you might elicit the opportunity to pull up that energy and eradicate it from somewhere stuck deep down within. For each is a self-discovery. Each is the opportunity to then be aware of what lies dormant and hidden and perhaps layered, and then layered again upon. For when there is not that understanding and it is actually put upon another, there is an angst which you see from time to time, especially within this day, where there is a deep angst against a one who is actually just serving as the mirror to the other. And there is not the preference, oftentimes, to see that which is not preferred within oneself.
Mm.
And it is so much easier to see it in another. And there are those today in the screen of life that are a great example. For they might pontificate or do things in a mannerism that is unpreferred. But in the secret backdrop of the mind, it might be the very thing that the one who engages the loudest is a part of that same dynamic as well. And so it is always most interesting to hear who loudly proclaims of another what they do not like. For often it is a lecture to oneself.
Mm-hmm.
And it is that means of self-identification. And so this one who does communicate now, one day gave someone who worked for her a lecture of measure because they had done something that was so plainly, obviously incorrect from their lack of focus and their lack of priority and their lack of willingness to see what was plainly evident before them. And after she blew off some steam, she chuckled and asked the one who she had relegated over the coals, so to speak, what she had said in full totality, because she realized it was what she needed to see herself. And so when there is that level of recognition, then all becomes much easier. For how would you receive insights and understandings if there was not a methodology for you to do so? And so when you recognize that those who present the greatest angst in your life stream are but a mirror in many regards, and sometimes it is not the specific thing, but it is the overarching premise, which is engaged from a posture of believing it is so for this purpose. For how can anyone know the purpose of another except from their mind? For no one knows another's heart except for the one who has the heart within. And so when there is the posturing of a belief that this one does this for this purpose, or this one does that for that purpose, it is then the mirror of the purpose as opposed to the specific action. For if one does something to empower and put power upon another, or if someone does and enacts a purpose to be dominant or to be better than, or to enlist some mighty objective, ask that question within oneself. For there is no way that anyone can postulate what another does or does not do unless they walked in their shoes and within their past embodiments as well, to know how all things formulate and flow within that one. For the only one that there is control is within oneself. And so we say to always start with oneself with love and a loving posture, and to not be so judgmental, because the judgments that are often placed are in many forms and fashions self-judgment. For how can you judge another when you know not who they are and why they act as such? So all moves from a belief system held within the one about others who they cannot know except through their own self-actions, through their own life dynamic, through their own posturing. And so when this is truly understood, judgments would be less than they are today. But it is not presumed. It is supposed that it is cast upon another as opposed to cast upon oneself. For everything that flows forth from the vessel of the individual can be nothing other than a reflection of that individual. As all energy does go out, gather more of its own kind, and come back to the very one who sent it forth. And so it is a self-fulfilling prophecy. And that is why positive thought and thinking is advised, always.